Lisa Delpit's Other People's Children, Cultural Conflict in the Classroom, Part 3. In this section of Delpit's text, she discusses her experiences and research in the villages of a province of Papua New Guinea in the early 1980s. Delpit describes the attempts of a people to make use of their own culture and language to educate their children. Delpit compares her research in Papua New Guinea with her work with African American parents who pushed urban school systems to include African and African American content in the curricula offered to their children. She describes the approach that was taken in the North Solomons province in teaching children to read and write in their native language before transferring to English literacy. The people's goal there was to give children the foundations of an education in the customs, culture, and acceptable behaviors of their community, and to teach children the basic preschool skills needed for success in a Western sense in the English medium primary school. Delpit describes some of the things she learned while living in Alaska in her essay, Hello Grandfather. Some of the things that she learned while there in Alaska included realizing that her fate was irrevocably connected to that of other Black people and the importance of context within an educational framework. In respect to the connection that Delpit says she feels toward other Black people, sociologists and anthropologists call it fictive kinship, but the individuals in her community call it living right. In terms of an educational context, Delpit describes how literacy is usually viewed as a solitary act in a Western sense. In the case of the Native Alaskan teachers she observed, they continued to have children read text aloud as a group, which was considered outdated by progressive administrators. Within Teachers' Voices, Rethinking Teacher Education for Diversity, Delpit presents some of the major concerns from non-white pre-professional and professional educators. Essentially, Delpit reveals through a series of interviews with teachers of color their struggle to have their voice heard and their authority as teachers respected by whites in the community. The teachers she interviewed also stated their teaching styles were affected by their own personal experiences as students and as learners, as well as pulling from their knowledge within their own families and cultures. Delpit argues for the restructuring of education more along the lines that would promote a progressive and social constructivist curriculum and pedagogy. In this sense, students with diverse backgrounds would engage in story sharing, which would emphasize more interaction through dialogue and problem-solving strategies. In this section, Cross-Cultural Confusions in Teacher Assessment, Delpit explores how teachers of color utilized alternative teaching methods in order to build relationships with students through emotional connections, and how individuals assessing this method misinterpreted it, resulting in negative consequences for the teachers. Delpit makes the argument that assessing non-white teachers needs to include factors such as the culture that their students are coming from, their environment, and their ways of communicating. In this revised method of assessment, non-white teachers should be allowed to talk about their practices in real contexts that foster an air of openness. Delpit discusses literacy in the context of teaching the dominant discourse in a racially diverse classroom in the section titled The Politics of Teaching Literate Discourse. She takes to task James Paul Gee's theories of literacy presented in his two articles, Literacy, Discourse, and Linguistics, Introduction, and What is Literacy? Essentially, Delpit disagrees with Gee's statements pertaining to the teaching and acquisition of a dominant discourse to individuals that were not born into it. Delpit questions Gee's assertion that individuals might experience major conflicts when attempting to acquire another discourse with another set of values. Some of the solutions that Delpit offers to this includes acknowledging and validating students' home language without using it to limit students' potential, recognizing the conflict Gee detailed between students' home discourses and the discourse of school, and acknowledging the unfair discourse stacking that our society engages in. In the section titled Education in a Multicultural Society, Our Future's Greatest Challenge, Delpit discusses the conflict between school culture and home culture. She states 2 points of contention in regards to how these two different cultures can clash in the form of teachers misreading students' aptitudes, intent, or abilities as a result in styles of language use and interactional patterns, and teachers utilizing styles of instruction and/or discipline that are at odds with community norms. Delpit describes how stereotypes can develop towards students of color in the classroom. For example, she describes how African American girls were rewarded for their nurturing behavior, while white girls were rewarded for academic behavior. Nonverbal Native American children in the classroom is another form of a stereotype that Delpit points out in this section. For this stereotype, she says, what is missing is the appropriate contexts, such as small groups, in which to talk. Delpit states several problems in educating poor and culturally diverse children, starting with the language used to describe certain communities of students as at risk, learning disabled, and the underclass. The second problem she notes is that we have created in most schools institutions of isolation, in which the communities that children come from are considered apart from their educational experiences in the classroom. Finally, Delpit states that the third problem involves moving beyond the narrow and essentially Eurocentric curriculum.